Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the FAA's Drone Advisory Committee meeting on Zoom. We are also live streaming this meeting on the FAA's YouTube channel, Twitter, and Facebook pages. Before we start the DAC meeting, I would like to share with you a few housekeeping items. First, we ask that everyone remain muted during the presentations. After each briefing, there will be an opportunity for the DAC members to engage in discussion and ask questions. Because of the large size of the group, we ask that you first raise your hand using the Zoom command on your dashboard. I will be moderating and will monitor the dashboard and call on you to begin speaking. Second, a reminder that this DAC meeting is being live streamed and recorded. The recording will be archived and made available for future viewing on the FAA's YouTube channel. Lastly, our FAA team is monitoring the meeting, so for those of you on Zoom, if you have technical problems at any time during the meeting, please make a note in the comments in the Zoom dashboard and we will assist you. For those viewing the live stream, we are unable to answer any of your questions posted in the chat box. So let's get started. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Jay Merkel, who is the Executive Director of the UAS Integration Office, for the official statement of the designated federal officer and his opening remarks. Jay?
You're on mute.
Mute.
Thank you, Gary, and a warm welcome to all of the members of the Drone Advisory Committee and all of those from across the United States and those attending on the live stream. Before I begin my opening comments, I have a few procedural items to go through. First, as the designated federal official for the Drone Advisory Committee, I'd like to read the official statement. In accordance with the Federal Advisory Committee Act, this advisory committee meeting is open to the public. Notice of the meeting was published in the Federal Register on May 13th, 2021. Members of the public may address the committee with prior approval of the chairman. This should be arranged in advance. Only appointed members of the advisory committee may vote on any matter brought to a vote by the chairman. The public may present written material to the advisory committee at any time. That concludes my official statement. At this time, I have the distinct honor, privilege, and I'm happy to introduce the FAA's Deputy Administrator, Mr. Bradley Mims, to say a few words. Brad?
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the kind introduction, Jay. And welcome to the June 2021 Virtual Drone Advisory Committee meeting. This is the fourth virtual meeting of the DAC, and we are finding that despite the limitations on travel restrictions, we are still able to connect and continue to accomplish the important work of the DAC. I'm excited to be here. This is my second DAC meeting, and I look forward to continued innovation to help the industry grow and prosper in a very safe manner in the years to come. I personally wanted to welcome and congratulate the DAC's newly appointed chair, Houston Mills. Houston has been a member of the DAC for several years and now brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the position. I look forward to his leading the DAC for the next 2 years as they work with us to continue to safely integrate drones into our national airspace system. I also want to welcome and congratulate our newest DAC member, Jeffrey Brown. Jeffrey is the Aviation Chief Operating Officer for SeaTac, Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. And again, Jeffrey will be a representative for the airports and airport community stakeholders group, which is a significant area as we address the intersection of airport operations and the growing development of advanced air mobility. Thank you both for your dedication and commitment to the work of the DAC. This work being done by this committee is directly contributing to our efforts to safely integrate drones into our national airspace system. When you think of drones, it is important to also consider the accessibility and equity that they bring to communities, providing STEM opportunities to students, delivering medicine, food and goods safely, and creating new jobs. Applications for UAS technology are as diverse as their users. Everything from small package delivery to life-saving search and rescue missions conducted by public safety officials to infrastructure inspections. In fact, energy and infrastructure companies are using UAS to inspect pipelines, oil wells, transmission lines, or look for obstructions on railways or compromised bridge construction. In addition, commercial photography and aerial data collection applications have become routine in the real estate and insurance industries. And agriculture applications include everything from spraying crops and monitoring livestock to collecting data on field hydration and pest infestation. The numbers associated with the drone community show how important and growing this sector is. 870,000 drone registrations, 230,000 plus certified remote pilots, 37 certified agricultural operators, and 33 UAS type certificate projects. But as we turn our attention to the challenges of routine, scalable, beyond visual line of sight operations, the work is going to get harder. This technology holds great promise, and especially in the area of sustainability. And I, like you here, am eager to tackle those challenges and ensure our regulatory framework, make sure that the framework meets the needs of the industry. For 2021, I expect to see even more great feedback from the DAC. And I know that I can count on this group to continue working in the spirit of cooperation that has been the ethos of this committee. Again, I look forward to tasking the DAC that will be discussed later by Jay is an important step as we seek to remove barriers and support this growth industry. I know that you will have a full agenda today and that you do have a full agenda today. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jay so we can get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. And what a great summary of where we are with the industry at the moment. The next item I want to highlight is today's agenda. If you could put that up, please. We have 3 presentations scheduled for today's agenda. The first is from Task Group 9 that will provide recommendations on how remote identification might be used to increase situation awareness among all aviation operators in low altitude airspace. These recommendations are in response to the FAA tasking issued in the October 22, 2020 meeting. The second presentation is an overview of uncrewed, or at the moment, the Unmanned Aircraft Safety Team, or UAS team, from Pete Dumont, President and CEO of the Air Traffic Control Association, and also the co-chair of the UAST. The third presentation will be from the DAC's newly formed Operations and Technology Subcommittee. The members of the subcommittee formed Task Group 10 to develop recommendations on gender-neutral language for the drone community in response to the FAA's tasking at the February 24th, 2021 DAC meeting. We will close out today's DAC meeting with some new taskings for the DAC to undertake and to provide an opportunity for any of the DAC members to discuss new business items. The final housekeeping item is the approval of the meeting minutes from the February 24th, 2021 meeting. These minutes have been posted on the DAC website and were included in the read-ahead material for this meeting. At this time, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the February 24th, 2021 DAC meeting.
So moved, Alpa.
Is there a second?
Second.
Are there any objections to the motion to approve the February 24th, 2021 meeting minutes? Hearing no objections, the motion is passed. At the last meeting, we said farewell to DAC Chair Michael Chasen. For today's DAC meeting, I want to recognize our new chair, Captain Houston Mills. And Brad, thank you for the kind words you said about Houston. For all of us who've worked with Houston over the years, I am so grateful that he graciously accepted our offer to be the new DAC chair. I also want to personally welcome Mr. Jeffrey Brown, who joins us from Seattle Tacoma International Airport. We hope to announce some more changes to the DAC in the near future. Before I turn it over to Houston for his opening remarks, I want to highlight some of the significant achievements that have occurred since our last meeting in February. As you know, we had the first half of our annual UAS symposium 2 weeks ago. The ability to continue to engage and interact with all the members of the drone community through these types of venues is invaluable. Like last year, this year's event was completely virtual and divided into 2 episodes, 3 and 4, to follow on from last year's virtual events. This episode of the FAA Symposium was held on June 9th and 10th, and it was a great event. We had 80 speakers, 25 sessions, over 675 attendees, and I'm just so happy that this continues to be a truly global event. We had 87 international attendees from 33 countries. During the symposium, FAA Administrator Steve Dixon announced the creation of a Beyond Visual Line of Sight Aviation Rulemaking Committee and the Recreational UAS Safety Test, or TRUST. The first of these announcements represents an inflection point for UAS integration. The results of the ARC will help us move on from a series of one-off approvals to the predictable operation under a rule, which will truly unlock the true economic possibilities and the societal benefits of this technology. The inaugural group of TRUST test administrators were announced yesterday. TRUST will provide recreational flyers with free training tips, best practices, and educational resources. Completing TRUST will help recreational flyers operate safely in the airspace. I'm proud to say that one of our DAC members is also one of the initial TRUST test administrators. Thank you to the SHU Educational Foundation for collaborating with the FAA to strengthen our shared safety culture. So what does this mean for the Drone Advisory Committee? It means the work of the DAC and its subcommittees and task groups now become even more invaluable. The ability to interact with the 14 different stakeholder groups that make up the DAC allows the FAA the ability to leverage industry input as it creates a regulatory environment necessary to achieve the safe integration of drones. I look forward to hearing the 2 latest sets of recommendations from the DAC task groups, and want to thank the dozens of individuals who put in many hours of work to make this DAC meeting a success. With that, Houston, I would like to turn it over to you. Mr. Chair, you have the floor.
All right. Well, thank you, Jay, and Mr. Mims. Thank you so much both for the kind introductions. It's great to see everyone again, and I'd like to personally welcome all to the DAC members from around the country for our virtual DAC meeting, and a special welcome to Mr. Brown as well. Also want to give a big welcome to all those who are viewing virtually via live stream. I appreciate the opportunity to serve as chair of this committee, and I'm truly humbled and honored to do so. I agree that the work of the DAC is a key component in the safe integration of drones in the National Airspace System, or NAS. The blending of traditional and non-traditional representatives on the DAC allows the FAA to stay ahead of the curve and create a regulatory environment that keeps safety as our North Star while simultaneously embracing innovation. Having been a member of the DAC since its establishment in 2016, I can personally attest to the value that DAC provides the FAA through its thought leadership and input of information and shaping of future policy. Today's recommendations resulting from previous FAA taskings is a continuation of the important role federal advisory committees have been contributing to the FAA programs and initiatives. With that, we have a full agenda today, so I'd like to turn it over to our first presentation. Today's first briefing is from Task Group 9, led by James Burgess, CEO of Wing, who will present his team's recommendations on how remote identification might be used to increase situational awareness among all aviation operators in low altitude airspace. James, over to you.
Thanks, Houston, and congratulations. I think I can speak for us all when I say we're grateful and excited to have you serving as the new chair. Well, for Task Group 9, first I wanted to thank the FAA for this tasking. It's been a very rich topic and we've had a lot of good discussions and information shared around it. And in particular, I wanted to extend a thank you to our subgroup leads and Matt Satterley on our team, who has helped coordinate all of these efforts. So we'll hear from Matt for an overview of the top level recommendations, but the bulk of the content will actually be from the subgroup leads. So we can hear from all the individuals and working groups that created this content. So Matt, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, James. I also want to say congrats to Houston. Very excited to work with you. If we move to the next slide, I'm going to give you a very quick recap of where we are with the tasking. You may recall that in our last DAC meeting, I provided an interim update, so this may sound pretty familiar. But the original tasking in October came from the FAA to explore a previously issued RFI from the FAA on whether or not remote ID can increase situational awareness with manned aviation. And I should say at the outset, all of the terminology we expect to be updated with Task Group 10, but without their findings, some of our language may be a bit dated. So when on the next slide, you'll see we set out to dissect the problem statement from the RFI and from the tasking with the FAA. We saw this really breaking down in two fashions. One is to follow to the spirit, the intent of the RFI and the tasking from the FAA. What exactly was being asked of the task group and how were we going to answer it? And then the second way that we wanted to look at the question was to really explore the spirit of the tasking. How can we increase situational awareness in this low altitude airspace, and what changes need to be made, if any? And so I think the content that we were able to produce is really quite compelling, and we'll move into that shortly. If you move to the next slide, just a bit of a refresher on how we divided up the work. Subgroup 1 is exploring the letter of the law, as you will, if you will, led by AMA and AOPA. We had subgroup 2 looking at the technological capabilities led by BNSF and UPS, and subgroup 3 looked at some of the more future leaning issues led by the Dallas Police Department and Skyward. On the next slide, here are some of the high level takeaways, and then we'll dive into each of the subgroups. So the first takeaway that we really saw was that we wanted to avoid technology specific recommendations. The concept of situational awareness in our mind really didn't apply to the types of technology we were using, but the information that can be provided to those low altitude airspace operators. And so we wanted to make sure that whatever the FAA is able to do to increase situational awareness, we weren't being prescriptive. We wanted to make sure we were focused on the performance outcomes and the value derived from the information that can be created. Our second recommendation really focused on making sure that we respected the human factors elements for situational awareness. We didn't want to make anything required on the piloted aircraft community. We want this to be voluntary because we think that there are a number of opportunities that can be presented to those low altitude airspace operators without making heavy-handed requirements. Our third recommendation focused on sort of some of the forward-leaning opportunities that we saw coming. and how we can increase that situational awareness with the UAS industry, with UAS traffic management, and some of the other opportunities that we see building in areas like NASA with some of the UPPs and some of our foreign counterparts. And then the fourth recommendation really is a culmination of all of the work across each of the three subgroups. What really jumped off the page to us is that there are a lot of patterns that emerged when we started to explore all these different areas. And we saw that there's a lot of information that's readily available today, perhaps not collected in a way that was intended to be used with the UAS community in low altitude airspace, but could be repurposed. And so we think that there are technologies that are available that can be used today, such as ADS-B, that will really allow us to start reaping the benefits of this information-rich environment in low altitude airspace. And so we think that there are opportunities for the FAA and industry to start coming up with more beneficial use of that information in low altitude airspace. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to the subgroup 1 leads, Chris Cooper and Chad Budrow, to dive into some of the details.
All right, hello everyone. By way of introduction, my name is Chris Cooper, Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs at the Aircraft Owners and Pilot Association, also known as AOPA. We represent over 300,000 individual members. That represents a diverse group of enthusiasts, pilots, operators operating traditional aircraft, but also include recreational and commercial drone pilots and operators as well too. I'll hand it over to Chad for his introduction.
Hello, my name is Chad Budrow, Executive Director for the Academy of Model Aeronautics. We represent about 170,000 UAS operators in the national airspace, approximately 9,000 events, and 2,400 flying sites across the country.
All right, thanks, Chad. And I just want to say thanks to James and Matt for their leadership on this particular group. Certainly, Chad's work as co-leader on this particular subgroup, and definitely a big thanks to all the individuals that helped out putting together these recommendations. Now, I'm not going to repeat everything that Matt just said. He did a great job of reviewing the things that we are doing in between these three subgroups. But just as a reminder, right, this particular subgroup, we are looking at the actual tasking of this particular task group 9, and also as it relates to the RFI from 2020. So with that, next slide, please. Here are the broad four recommendations that this particular subgroup came up with. We will talk more about these more in depth later in this presentation, but from the data that we gathered and discussed in this particular subgroup over these past several months, that are essentially is the foundation for these recommendations, we had 3 broad themes that came out of this. One, that yes, remote ID information is or can be useful, could improve safety for low altitude aviators. But with that, there were a lot of concerns with human factors issues, right? When you add a lot of new information that can be used, that hasn't been used before, there are real concerns about increased workload, distraction, complacency for low altitude aviators in particular. And then also concerns and discussions about, as Matt discussed, accessibility with voluntary adoption using current infrastructure. And what we also saw is that these generally align with what the RFI responses from last year came up with as well too. So with that, I'll hand it off to Chad to discuss some of the methodology and the findings that we came up with through our work on this tasking group.
Thank you, Chris. And as he just mentioned, before we get into more depth about the recommendations, we feel it's important just to step back and briefly talk about the methodology. A lot of work from the subgroup went into this, and I cannot thank them enough for their work. It's a lot of tedious work, but it was a lot of good work. And it was a 2-pronged approach. Step 1 is we reached out to the authors who submitted RFIs and asked that they would voluntarily give that to us to review. We did receive 21 of the 30 RFIs. We broke our group into teams, and we did a deep dive into those RFIs. We found trends, we found data sets, we looked into human factors, we looked into perhaps voices that were not contained in those RFI responses. And that led us to step 2, which was survey deployment. And we did send out 2 surveys. One was more qualitative, the other one was more quantitative, but they both allowed for open-ended questions. And I have to again say thanks to the team for doing a deep dive into that. And I also want to thank our subject matter experts. We did bring into our group subject matter experts from MITRE, from the University of Alaska, AOPA, thank you. You brought in some subject matter experts as well to help us really understand how to properly conduct surveys, how to properly phrase questions, and how to properly deploy those questions. We'll share those results on the next slide. So if you can go to the next slide, please. There's a lot here, and I don't want to do death by PowerPoint. This is in our final report, along with other data. I will be referencing some of these stats as we go through the recommendations. So while I may not camp on this page very long here, I will be referencing these through the next few slides. If I had to provide a general narrative or finding, and I think you've already heard it a few times from Matt and Chris, is that there is support for remote ID in the flight deck, but there are some concerns. There's human factor concerns about distractions, workload, repeated requests that this be a voluntary integration into the flight deck, and that's reflected in our recommendations, which are on the next slide. So next slide, please.
All right, thanks for that, Chad. Appreciate that. So for our first recommendation that we came up with, this really ties in with the safety and human factors issues that Chad and Matt were discussing earlier, that we felt as a group, based off the data, is that the FAA should look and resolve any safety and human factor issues prior to making remote identification information available in the flight deck. We know, especially a long history with traditional aviation, that human capabilities are limited, right? They change with increased demands and decreased demands and over time. So what are ways that aviation has done to help mitigate any or to help with situational awareness or safety? Technology, information, right? We have used that as a way to improve situational awareness, but we also know, right, that too much can result in a loss of situational awareness, a decrease in safety, and also increase in complacency, right? And so with that, knowing that remote identification information, if that were to be brought into a flight deck, that could increase additional workload. And we want to work through that. We want to find what concerns, what issues might come up with that, and needing to evaluate all those safety and human factors issues before adding more information into the flight deck in an area for further research. And Chad, he's going to share some of the data that kind of shows some of that as well.
If there are a couple stats to pull out, 54.31% of those we surveyed did have some concerns about remote ID in the flight deck. They felt it could somewhat or significantly increase workload, but yet those same participants also said 71.31% said that remote ID in the flight deck would somewhat or significantly increase safety. So there's support for remote ID, but there's some human factor concerns.
Great,
next slide,
thanks.
please.
Thanks, Chad. Yeah, so moving on to that, that gives some really good background, which then segues well into recommendation 2, right? How do we get access? And that is through voluntary adoption using current technologies and infrastructure. So have a couple diagrams on this slide here. Example of an electronic flight bag. Many pilots that operate at high and lower altitudes use these electronic devices for situational awareness, for information, charts, weather information, things of that sort, and also electronic flight instrument systems, where those two can also provide information that might be relevant for safety and situational awareness, flight attitude, location, things of that sort. So things that many pilots, not all aircraft, but many aircraft do have resource and access to that, to those technologies. And so with that, the responses that we got were really talking about leveraging, using those current systems that are already used by many traditional aviators as a resource, right? And then also the importance of it being voluntary, right? Not only for cost, but also issues of having another device in the flight deck, maybe not having sufficient room, maybe unable to physically install any additional equipment. And then also tying into the human factors issues, increased workload distractions for certain operations, especially at low altitudes.
Correct. And, I mentioned 70%, 70+% felt this would increase safety. 73.5% felt that remote ID would be somewhat or very useful in the flight deck. And overwhelmingly 92.01% felt it would be most effective in existing technologies. And our study actually validated a lot of the other secondary data sets we have. 84%, as Chris mentioned, already are using some sort of electronic flight bag or other equipment in the flight deck. Next slide. Thank you.
Thanks, Chad. The next recommendation really ties into the human factors issues that we talked about in recommendation 1. And that's really, okay, so we get access, we have this available voluntarily into the flight deck. Well, what can we do to make sure that information is relevant? And that's really talking about addressing being able to have appropriate filtering methods, techniques, appropriate standards, to make sure the information is not overburdensome and that you are getting the most relevant information at your relevant altitude and operations. So we know that there is that potential for significant irrelevant number of targets during those high workload operations, low altitude again. And we also see a lot of different software and hardware platforms as well too. So we see this as an opportunity to make sure the FAA and industry work through those traps, and definitely more areas for research and obtaining more information on this.
And we did receive an overwhelming amount of feedback on this recommendation. 92.37% were interested in the capability to filter, and our qualitative data echoed that, which was found throughout the comments. Concerns about the less clutter, the better. Requests to empower the pilot to make decisions, let their ops or needs dictate what remote ID information would be most helpful for their situation. Next slide, please.
All right, and finally, for our last recommendation is education to the broader pilot community about remote identification. And this does tie into a lot of other recommendations that have been presented to the DAC about further education, leveraging industry and the FAA to get information out. And we did see that some of the responses, some of the nuances with the data that we got, that it may show, right, that there could be some lack of understanding of what remote identification is, its limitations, its benefits. And so this is something that as a subgroup, that we felt that this would be another good recommendation to bring forward and aligns with past DAC recommendations and current efforts.
Agreed. And we all know remote ID is still relatively new, and that was reflected in a lot of the data we received back, both quantitative and qualitative. There's some confusions in the comments, misinterpreting how remote ID, what data package would be included in remote ID, how remote ID would be executed. So we felt that this was an important recommendation, especially with this new technology, to help continue to educate all users. Next slide, please.
So perfect. So in conclusion, just as a review of what we've kind of seen here and the recommendations that we have, that we show that, hey, are the data that we've collected both from the RFI responses and our surveys do show that remote ID information can be useful for situational awareness at low altitude aviators that are operating in those environments. But we do want to make sure that we're carefully disseminating that information using current infrastructure on voluntary basis, so we don't create those safety and human factors issues. Definitely areas for future work and research, coordination with EFB and avionics suppliers and providers as well. So, Chad,
and again, thank you to everyone. Thank you, Chris, for helping co-lead this effort. Thanks to all those who participated. A lot of work, a lot of meetings, a lot of data analysis, a lot of segmentation and breaking the subgroup up into smaller teams, but some great work. And I'm going to transition over to Jennifer Player for subgroup 2. Jennifer.
Thanks, Chris and Chad. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jen Player, Director of Regulatory Affairs at Skydio, presenting the work of Task Group 9, Subgroup 2. Next slide, please. Subgroup 2 is tasked with conducting a technology assessment, exploring existing or near-term technologies that can provide situation awareness to all low-altitude aviators, those in all varieties of traditional crewed aircraft and those operating uncrewed aircraft systems. The group developed a matrix describing these technologies. We used publicly available information and leveraged the knowledge and experience of our group members. Now, this extends beyond remote ID. We sampled technologies in the categories of ADS-B, detect and avoid, and strategic deconfliction. And the goal of that effort was to describe capabilities, identify technology gaps, highlight human factors issues, estimate cost information, and to overall help inform the recommendations of Task Group 9. The matrix is quite large, and so what you see here is a condensed summary of that information. We've listed here the technology category, its applicability, whether it's widely available or in development, and a very rough estimate of the cost to develop and cost to end users. What were our observations? Well, there are a variety of existing and near-term technologies that provide situation awareness of traditional crewed aircraft operations, ADS-B, for example, and all the technologies intended for DAA. That's their purpose. But there are fewer technologies for providing situation awareness of uncrewed aircraft operations to the flight deck of traditional crewed aircraft. So if I'm flying at low altitude in my GA aircraft, how do I know if there is a UAS operating near me? Yes, there are solutions which provide notification and depiction of UAS operating areas, but fewer which provide near real-time information of specific UAS speed, position, and altitude. So we just identified that as a technology gap. Subgroup 2 was tasked with estimating costs, and it's pretty challenging. We almost decided not to engage with that, but it's a complex issue, especially for technologies and systems which are a blend of software, hardware, and infrastructure, and can be public, private, or a partnership. So in the larger matrix provided to the DAC, the subgroup opted to estimate rough order of magnitude cost of development of the total technology solution and the cost to the end user. And for each, there's a breakdown of components which contribute to that estimate. But here in the summary, we provide ranges to bracket the cost. You see here, purple is less than $1,000, while red is greater than 10 million. Given what you see here in the summary, that the takeaway is simply that while costs vary depending on many factors, it's generally very costly to develop ground-based network solutions. And this isn't surprising because there's some infrastructure involved. The cost to end users is much less and is often recurring, such as a subscription-based service, and that's also not surprising. Next slide, please. Aligned with what you heard from subgroup 1, of particular interest to subgroup 2 was how remote ID information could be used to provide situation awareness of UAS operations to the flight deck of traditional crewed aircraft. So how are we going to get that information there? With broadcast remote ID and what is labeled in this diagram as direct, it's not exactly clear whether this is viable. Depending on the altitude of operation and cruise speed, the range limitations of most common broadcast implementations may result in little to no situation awareness value to low altitude aviators in traditional aircraft. But there are a variety of ways for the information to be provided via a network type solution. And by network, we simply mean collecting information, aggregating it, possibly filtering it, and delivering it via connection to a server versus individual receivers directly sensing individual broadcasts. If the information can be provided or sensed by either means, though, we need to be aware that there are, as subgroup 1 emphasized, human factors associated with scanning potentially additional or multiple devices and displays, which may use different symbology and alerting concepts. So this is especially true in phases of flight for which the workload is already elevated and where drones are likely to be, such as in takeoff and landing phases. So if we provide this information to the flight deck, it really needs to be in a format that aviators understand and can easily manage. Next slide, please. So in summary, providing useful and timely information of UAS position, speed, and altitude to the flight deck of traditional crewed aircraft is potentially a technology gap that's been identified by this group. And solutions other than remote ID with potentially better detection range and coverage, it may be better for providing situation awareness in general. There's ongoing development of other solutions such as onboard and ground-based passive and active sensors, and development of these has largely been driven by the responsibility placed on UAS to yield the right of way to all crewed aircraft. There's significant costs to develop these technologies, and that's being borne by the UAS community, but at this time, none of them are truly widely available. So that concludes our presentation for the work of subgroup 2. I want to thank all the members of the subgroup for their time and effort. And now you'll hear from subgroup 3, so I'll pass it off to Mark and Sam.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm Mark Colborn. I'm a retired reserve officer with the Dallas PD Aviation Unit, specifically the UAS Squad. And I'm happy to report we are literally just weeks away from starting our unit, getting our unit up and operational. So we're really excited about that. Sam, I understand you're here too, correct? I think
that's right.
Okay.
Thanks, Mark.
Great.
I'm Sam Ewan. I'm a product manager here at Skyward, and I'll let you take it away, Mark.
Okay, thank you. Our group was created to explore areas specifically outside the original Group 9 tasking that can improve situational awareness for crewed and uncrewed aircraft in the low altitude airspace. Our group agreed that all suggestions must be voluntary, which we hope will encourage participation. And we didn't want to suggest any recommendations that would require regulatory actions, and none of them do. Sam and I agreed early on that we needed to base our recommendations on scenarios outlined in Chapter 3 of the FAA's Next Gen UTM Concept of Operations version 2.0. And each recommendation does this also. The UTM ConOp scenarios were written around the idea that the network remote ID solution would become a requirement. Since it was not included in the RID final rule, our group's focus shifted to ideas that can fill the situational awareness gap created in the plan. We looked at technologies currently available or in development, and we tried to anticipate what will be needed in the future to achieve a fully functional UTM system. Although the FAA and industry has said that remote ID is a major first step towards the development of a UTM solution, our group was aware from the beginning that remote ID was never meant to be used as an aircraft separation, collision avoidance, or tactical deconfliction solution, but mainly for identification. Remote ID, however, when combined with additional detection methods and voluntary flight intent reporting, can be used to increase situational awareness in the low altitude space. We didn't delve into the tactical deconfliction or detect and avoid arena because there are several organizations that have developed or continue to develop standards for that issue. Now, during our project, the group formulated 7 assumptions based on multiple written plans and communications, but mostly we referred to ConOps version 2. These assumptions created a common framework to reduce misunderstandings and ensure that all members were working from the same playbook, and they help drive our recommendations. So for more information on how we arrived at our recommendations, please refer to our subgroup's report starting on page 46 in the DAC public ebook or Annex 3. In the end, our group decided on 5 recommendations. We concentrated on solutions that can be implemented quickly and others which will require time to develop and introduce. Next slide, please. And those are our 5 recommendations right there. Next slide. The first one is voluntary ADS-B in use for UAS operators. Now this one didn't get included until almost the end, probably because it's such an obvious suggestion. We put this recommendation first because it's the easiest to implement and the technology exists now. It's simplistic and relatively inexpensive, probably costing maybe a couple bucks of a drone to add this feature. And one manufacturer already includes this feature in their newer models. And customers seem to like it, and they've been giving it good reviews from what I've been able to see. I know I was flying my Mavic Pro Platinum on a project here just inside the DFW class surface area under a Lance authorization, by the way, a couple of weeks ago, and I had a Schweitzer 300 helicopter come into my area, really kind of unannounced, and he was flying at 250 feet. And luckily, I was flying at treetop level at the time, and I was able to recover the drone and get it on the ground real quick. But I'll tell you, it came out of nowhere, and I really would have liked to have had some type of notification that that helicopter was coming. And I know this is a great feature for that. All we're asking the FAA to do in this recommendation is to encourage the industry and manufacturers to add this feature. Hey, before I forget, let me thank all the individuals who participated in this project, especially my co-lead, Sam Yoon from Skyward. And I were able to put together a significant brain trust comprised of 21 individuals who are truly experts in the field of uncrewed aerial vehicles. We had airplane pilots, helicopter pilots, and owners. We had airline pilots as well as UAS operators, both commercial and recreational. So we had recreational representation on this group. We had individuals from aviation advocacy organizations, ag operators, public safety, local government, academia, ATC. We had software developers, US manufacturers, and individuals involved in the IPP and beyond programs. And we even had one airport manager of an uncontrolled airport, which was really kind of cool. And he had a lot of really good ideas. It was truly a great group, and I can tell you that I personally learned a lot. We met 16 times over 6 months, and a lot of excellent ideas were thrown out for discussion, and some were dismissed out of hand and others adopted and refined. And these are the ideas that I have the pleasure and privilege of presenting to all of you today. Next slide, please. Thank you. Radio use by UAS operators. The FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, in 1997 eliminated the requirement for US registered aircraft flying in US airspace to have an individual radio station license. So an aircraft pilot doesn't need an FCC license to operate an aircraft radio station. A UAS operator, however, would and does need an FCC restricted radio telephone operator's license in order to operate a ground station, or for instance, transmit on one of these. I don't know if you can see it. It's a handheld radio, handheld airband radio. As a situational awareness tool, our proposal is for the FAA to allow UAS operators to transmit on multi-com frequencies when necessary to give traffic advisories while operating in the vicinity of non-towered airports or in uncontrolled airspace when appropriate. Also, our proposal is to have UAS operators voluntarily monitor ATC frequencies when operating in controlled airspace, including Class E, but, and that's a strong but, with the stipulation that no non-emergency comms with ATC be allowed. We further recommend that the FAA amend Advisory Circular 107-2A and add a section on radio communications procedures and include instructions for how to obtain a restricted radio telephone operator's license. And we also recommend the FAA amend the UAS operating handbook with the same instructions on how to obtain the license. And to kill two birds with one stone, so to speak, we recommend the FAA leverage the FAST team through Wings as a method to provide US operators training on radio procedures and to inform Part 61 pilots about UAS operations and remote ID. Next slide, please. Thank you. Voluntary onboard access to remote ID info for low altitude aviators. Well, as a police and military helicopter pilot with over 40 years of operational experience, and most of it operating in low altitude airspace, awareness of UAS operating in my vicinity is very important to me, and I'm not alone. Now, even despite concerns that flight deck workload, distractions, and the recognized responsibility for UAS operators to avoid piloted aircraft, over 70% of respondents to subgroup 1's poll felt remote ID in information would be useful and increase situational awareness, as was already pointed out. And that's 332 responses representing 46 different entities and organizations. Now, how do we get this broadcast remote ID information to the pilot? Well, the most popular solution, according to 92% of the respondents to Group 1's poll, opted for a low-cost solution that includes using current infrastructure and technology that are broadly adopted by aircraft pilots. This includes electronic flight bags and by approval of non-certified devices through the North Sea policy. But some pilots may prefer an onboard installed solution, which requires TSO approvals. Perhaps not an ideal option for everyone, since it could add another screen to an already packed flight deck. But to an operator that consistently operates below 500 feet AGL, for instance, ag operators or helicopter operators that are doing like pipeline patrol or power line installations, this option might be very, very attractive. Now, our group engaged in a spirited conversation about the range of airborne to airborne remote ID, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth signals, and whether the signal could be received and processed by an onboard solution with enough lead time to be useful to an aircraft pilot. Well, testing has been done in this area, including a recent ASTM MOC presentation that showed remote ID info packets are received out to 3 kilometers. Our group was presented with enough, but we acknowledge more testing and verification is needed. And coincidentally, and just kind of as a verification for this recommendation, I was just informed last week that the Virginia Tech Mid-Atlantic Aviation Partnership will be working as a sub to support remote ID testing later this fall. The program is a NASA Phase 2 Small Business Innovation Research Project working with Mosaic ATM entitled Small Unmanned Collision Avoidance Systems, or SUCAS. The program, according to the information I found on their website, takes advantage of the position data broadcasted by small UAS to present situational awareness and maneuver guidance to augment a pilot's see and avoid capability. They will test standalone and self-powered grid beacons and receivers with the ultimate vision of eventually piping this remote ID data into electronic flight bags or other flight deck instruments. And going back to what Chad and Chris were saying with Group 1, we also, because 93% of respondents recognize a need to be able to filter the data, additional human factors studies are needed and recommended on this particular recommendation. Next slide, please. Voluntary notify and fly. Well, according to UTM ConOps, visual line of sight UAS operators and aircraft pilots will not be required to share flight intent via UTM. However, voluntary sharing of flight intent by aircraft pilots and UAS operators can benefit all NAS stakeholders, and ConOps calls this active participation. Notify and fly is similar to a Lance type experience scaled for uncontrolled airspace and enables low altitude aircraft pilots and UAS operators to voluntarily enter their flight intent into an app on an internet connected device. In essence, it allows them to say, I'm flying here at this time for this long. Well, these intent volumes would be shared with relevant stakeholders throughout the UTM system. Notify and fly can be a great pre-flight planning tool and act as a model or first step towards developing a viable UTM solution in conjunction with further FAA rulemaking and full implementation of broadcast remote ID. We propose that the FAA consider Notify and Fly as a candidate for the UPP3 validation. Next slide, please. Ground-based remote ID in detection network. Broadcast remote ID will essentially be localized. So to support recommendation 3, and for aircraft pilots without an onboard remote ID receiver, another method is needed to get this information to the flight deck. In this recommendation, we propose a network of ground-based remote ID receivers that can receive and share this information with the UTM system, and when appropriate, transmitted to pilots via TIS-B or other mechanisms like electronic flight bags. These remote ID receivers, combined with other ground-based detection systems, such as RF, acoustic, electro-optical, and radar systems, can also help identify non-participating piloted aircraft and UAS. And as we all know, non-participating means they're not squawking an ATC transponder or ADS-B, and non-participating UASs will not be transmitting remote ID information. This system would fill a situational awareness and communications gap by sharing a visual line of sight UAS operations that otherwise are not required to participate in UTM. Now, we understand undoubtedly that this will be the most difficult and expensive option we recommend, but it can benefit all users of the National Airspace System. Now, to control costs initially, these ground-based detection systems could be scaled to cover important areas in major cities, critical infrastructure, or major sports venues first, then expanded from there. Again, for a more detailed description of our recommendations, please refer to page 46 in the DAC ebook. Again, I want to thank all of the participants who participated in this project. Thank you. For the next slide. This project would not have been possible without volunteers outside of our DAC group, okay? And I especially want to thank Sam Ewing, my co-lead on this project, for his steadfastness and guiding hand, and Dave Messina from the FPV Freedom Coalition, who acted as our project manager. He scheduled our meetings, worked up slides, and basically kept everyone on point during the meetings. Again, I want to thank all of you for your attention and allowing me a little extra time to present this very important project. And I'm going to toss it over to Sam now. Sam, do you have anything you want to add or anything else you want to say?
Thanks, Mark, for presenting our subgroup's recommendations. I'd like to add another expression of gratitude to all the members of the subgroup for their contributions. You can see on the slide the diversity of the membership we had, of many bright and talented individuals, and the many hours that they put in that allowed us to land on this set of recommendations. So to all of you, thank you.
Thank you again. Guess we'll toss it back to Houston. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark and Sam, and thanks to all the group leads. I think we're going to move into a question and answer period if anybody has questions, but I just wanted to say with the completion of each of the presentations of the 3 subgroups, you can obviously tell that they spent a lot of time, put in a lot of effort into this work, and can't thank them enough for all of their help. So I really want to say thanks again.
Just a reminder, if anyone has any questions, just raise your hand in the dashboard and I'll call on you and you can provide your question.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. Enjoyed working with you.
Thanks.
We'll wait a little bit for anyone if they have any questions or comments.
Maybe our work was that thorough.
I think we might have nailed it.
Well, if no questions and comments, thank you again to all.
Oh, I see. Adam has his hand up, Gary.
Okay, Adam.
Hey everyone, I'm Adam Bree, co-founder and CEO of Skydio. We're a US drone company. We focus on small camera drones. I really just wanted to recognize and echo the importance of one of the ideas that we heard in the presentation, which was great. I think the notion of filtering data based on the type of drone, the mission profile, the altitude is super, super important. And one of the things that we see with our customers, especially in public safety and infrastructure inspection, is that there can be a tremendous amount of value in flights that are incredibly close to the ground, literally a few feet from the ground, flying just a few miles an hour. And I actually did the math on this, from a kinetic energy and sort of an overall flight profile standpoint. These missions are pretty similar to like a baseball or a football, and they can literally be life-saving work. So I think, when we think about the best ways for crewed and uncrewed aircraft to coexist, the more granular that we are on the drones involved and how high they're flying, how fast they're flying, what the overall mission profile is, I think the more likely we are to get better outcomes for everyone.
Yeah, great point. That was discussed at length, and we think that's going to be really valuable as we move forward.
Okay, I'm not seeing any additional questions or hands raised. Houston.
Not either. I think it's back to Houston.
Well, great. Well, wow. I think there's no questions because that was just fantastic, James. Thank you and all the presenters and all the contributors to this phenomenal work that you guys have put together for these recommendations. At this time, I will entertain a motion to forward Task Group 9 situational awareness recommendations to the FAA. Can I get a motion,
So
please?
moved. So moved.
Great. Is there a second?
Okay.
I'll second it.
Wonderful. The motion has been seconded. Are there any objections to forwarding Task Group 9 situational awareness recommendations to the FAA? Wonderful. Hearing no objections, the motion to forward Task Group 9's recommendations to the FAA is approved. Our next presentation, and again, thank you, James and team, just a fantastic job. Our next presentation is from Pete DuPont, co-chair of Unmanned Aircraft Safety Team and president and CEO of the Air Traffic Control Association, who will present a special UAST overview. So Pete, welcome, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Houston, and congratulations. And I guess we've gone full circle because the first time I worked with you virtually, you were in a cockpit of an F-18 at the RAG, and I was working approach at Lemoore. So good to be working with you virtually again. Again, I'm co-chair of the Unmanned Aircraft Safety Team. Fairly new to this position. I was appointed in January, and I've been working very closely with Jay and the rest of the team to develop a path forward for the safety team. Jay and I discussed our relationship and collaboration with other organizations, and we determined very quickly that we should come to the DAC, give an overview of the Unmanned Aircraft Safety Team, and from there, try to develop a relationship for collaboration moving forward in the future for us to present more often and with findings and a little bit more substance than just an overview that I'll give you today. Next slide, please. So the Unmanned Aircraft Safety Team was chartered in the fourth quarter of 2016 by then FAA Administrator Michael Warta. It's a government industry collaboration to help drive safety in the integration of UAS into the NAS. The team has about 79 members right now, and you can see those on the slide in front of you. The members support the working groups, which I'll get into in a minute. And we determine what the membership is based on what type of expertise we need for our working groups to produce our deliverables. Right now, membership is closed as we evaluate our working groups. We evaluate the work we've done. And as we determine what we want to do moving forward and whether our working groups are still valid and whether maybe some need to be sunsetted and maybe we need some new working groups. So we're in a transitional phase right now. And I'm working very closely with the steering committee and Jay, of course. Next slide, please. So these are our working groups. There are 4 main working groups and 1 new working group that we're putting in place. And I'll go through these fairly quickly. Next slide, please. So among some of the first working groups that we determined we needed was the data analysis or analytics working group. When we put this group together, we quickly determined the need for UAS incident and accident related data as a fundamental building block to recommendations for safety within the NAS. We also quickly determined back in 2017 that very little data actually existed, nascent industry. So one source of data was the form of UAS reports entered mainly by manned aviators within the Aviation Safety Reporting System, or the ASRS. So rather than build our own reporting system, the unmanned aircraft safety team members eventually decided to reach out and collaborate with NASA for UAS support in the ASRS. And since then, NASA ASRS team has been very active with us, vocal, and a very, very good supporter of ours. Next slide, please. So our safety assurance working group incorporates the ASRS, the Aviation Safety Reporting System, which went live for UAS in the first quarter of this year. A little history. Now, we have an entire presentation about ASRS and how it relates to the UAS environment. But you can see here some of the reporting requirement, or some of the reporting options for near mid-air collisions, equipment issues, lost link, flyaway, and you can see the rest on the slide. The thing about the ASRS is that it's non-punitive. It doesn't identify the reporter, and it helps us gather data. A little history. It's an FAA voluntary confidential reporting system. It was first proposed over 50 years ago, and I think it went live in the middle of the 1970s. It's operated by NASA, who's seen as a neutral third party due to its lack of enforcement authority or regulatory authority with relation to the airlines. NASA collects data, analyzes, and responds to voluntarily submitted aviation safety incident reports in order to reduce the likelihood of aviation accidents. So they're collecting the data that we've been looking for. Under the FAA's authority, NASA extends limited immunity to individual aviation workers for reporting safety events. Aviation safety trends are routinely published by the community and by NASA. Those of you in aviation are familiar with ASRS and in air traffic control, the ATSAT program. And this gives us a voluntary way to actually identify some of the issues that are out there without punitive action to the person that reported them. You make a mistake in the airspace, something happens, you report it, and it helps other people not make the same mistakes. Next slide, please. This is the information you need if you were to file an unmanned safety, on aviation safety reporting system report. Goes to NASA, NASA reports out on it. Next slide, please. Now, how this all works together is we'll gather the data from the ASRS. We'll take that data, we'll analyze it in our data analytics analysis work group. Then we'll turn that information over to the safety mitigation work group, and the safety mitigation work group will report out and make safety recommendations based on the data we receive from those reports. Next slide, please. We have a strategic communications work group that takes all this, they work and they take all this data and they help us communicate it out through social media, through website development, and through associations and things like the US Symposium and other types of events where we could communicate what's going on in the unmanned aircraft world and what we're doing about it. So we try to increase awareness. We're trying to educate the public. We're trying to find ways to get the information out there to the users that might not otherwise be able to have that information, so that we can integrate some of the safety lessons we're learning to the community. Next slide, please. So beyond visual line of sight, As you heard Jay say, there's a new ARC. So we're developing a working group that will address beyond visual line of sight. As we open up membership again, we'll probably get some new members that can help us staff this working group, help us get all the information we need to be able to produce the kind of focus on the safety or execution, not rulemaking, not implementation, but SMS operations, NAS integration, those types of things. And we'd like to work very closely with the ARC in developing recommendations to provide to the ARC from this working group. Next slide, please. So this is just an awareness so that people are aware that Drone Safety Awareness Week is coming up September 13th through the 19th. This is one of our communication mechanisms where we promote safety, drones for good stories, try to educate the public. And it's a bit of on the tail of the UAS symposium and try to build on some of the things we heard there, some of the successful efforts and programs, some of the partnerships in safety that we've seen. Next slide, please. Collaboration. I think, I think this is one of the areas where we really need a lot of work in the unmanned aircraft safety team. We've got a good industry participation for collaboration, but we need to collaborate more with, we collaborate with the FAA. I personally sit on the NAC and can collaborate with the NAC in that way. This is our first reach out to the DAC. Of course, we work with NASA with ASRS, so that's coming along nicely, and the NTSB. So I think we have to increase our collaboration, our participation, working with the NAC, the NTSB. This also translates into international entities. We deal a lot with the UAS and the issues that we encounter with state, local, tribal, and national governments in working UAS and some of the procedures that we develop, some of the safety initiatives we see, and some of the issues we see that need to be addressed. Working internationally, we can work with our international partners to see some lessons learned that we might not see here to be able to fill in some of the gaps that exist in our safety programs moving forward. Of course, working with the unions as we always do and always will, other trade associations, other associations, and attend more events like the UAS Symposium where we last spoke, and Drone Safety Awareness Week, AUVSI's events, ATCA's events, those types of things, so that we can get the word out there, continue the education programs, continue advising on what we think are good safety recommendations moving forward. Next slide, please. So all I wanted to do today to accomplish was give you a quick overview of when the unmanned aircraft safety team was, the kind of work we're doing, and the kind of work we intend to do moving forward. So I hope this was informative, and I hope to speak
Super
to the
informative.
Any questions or comments? Okay, with that, I'll hand it back to you, Houston.
I see a couple hands up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, so Bryant Lynn, you want to go ahead and ask a question?
Yeah, first off, Pete, thank you for stepping in and taking the leadership role. I was very involved at the front end of the UAST, and I've sort of drifted away from it, not intentionally. But I want to make sure you've got my complete support for everything that you've proposed, and thank you for participating in the FAA UAS Symposium. I think that was really important. I had a question, though. I was really excited about the ASRS stuff because I do think that it will help us collect some data and see where we've got rough spots. As you know, it's been so good. I'm a religious reader of callback when it comes out. Yeah. And are we getting any uptake on folks? I mean, in the community that I fly in, of course, it's always thought of as a get out of jail free card, which of course it is not. But we make mistakes from time to time, and we learn from those. Are we getting any uptake on that? And I know that's going to be partially a function of how widespread it is, and how much of an incentive it is for folks to report mistakes or tight spots, what have you, whatever emerges. But do we have some way of getting some feedback on how that data is coming in, whether or not it's those educational efforts are working?
Sure. Well, first of all, Brian, yes, I was involved with you at the beginning of UAST. You've always been a big supporter. I appreciate that, and I look forward to continued support from you and your organization. No, we haven't got a lot of data yet. That's what part of this is. This is us getting out there and informing everyone that's involved in this about the program, how to use it. The misconception is it's a get out of jail free card because of the non-punitive action. It should certainly not be thought of like that. This is something that has been integral in manned aviation for years and years on helping make the system safer. It does the same thing for air traffic control, and it'll do the same thing for UAS. So right now, our goal is to get the word out there, get people understanding what the system is, how to access it, how to use it, and what benefit it provides to them. Also getting them reading callback so they can see what other UAS operators are doing, what's working, what's not working. As you know from your community, you read callback and you go, oh, I've seen that before. This must be an ongoing problem. I need to watch out for this. That's what we're looking for. So with our strategic communications working group, we're trying to get the word out there on the ASRS. We've got Ken Krantz going out to Oshkosh to sit in the FAA, well, where the FAA 10 would normally be, and talk about the ASRS with unmanned operators so they get the word out there. As of yet, we don't, Jay, maybe you can correct me, but we don't have a lot of input on the ASRS yet. Like I said, it was just made active a couple of weeks ago, first quarter of 21.
Yeah, I haven't seen the first formal report come back from NASA yet.
No. Did that answer your question, Brian? Okay.
Okay, call on Trish Gilbert.
Hey, Trish.
Hey, thanks, Pete. I appreciate this. And I'm sure if NAC has drifted away to some degree, you're going to let us know and we'll make sure that we re-engage. That tends to happen, but, really important work. A couple of things. I don't know if it's an urban myth or, I've heard it throughout my career that there may be this belief that stuff that gets reported through the ASRS may not go anywhere. So people are reluctant to report. So I get, again, very important that now you guys are trying to communicate wherever you can that this is an avenue that can be utilized and that the information is taken and actions are then taken based on what we get. Strong proponent, Joe's right behind me from ALPA, going to talk about how much more, how much safer this makes the system to be proactive than reactive, being able to prioritize safety concerns. So thanks for that. But I didn't know if you're getting any of that feedback on that the reporting doesn't go anywhere, because we've heard that before. And so you're giving me a yes, and Jay's giving
yes,
me
I have heard that.
Okay.
Not widespread, but a couple.
Okay.
This is just another government reporting thing. I send it to them. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't do any good. Why bother? And why tell on myself? That's the thing I hear most often about this type of program. NACA is involved, and I do appreciate that. I would tell you if you heard. So thank you for that. But I don't think it's widespread. I think that's just the small pockets of some people that really don't understand the system yet. And I think it's our job to educate.
Yeah, and Tricia, I was saying no from purely the drone perspective.
Okay.
Because I don't think, and this is where Pete and I really feel this passion of making sure people know this is available to them. I'm not, the drone community, I don't think has had enough experience yet to either hear or adopt that urban myth yet.
Great. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have brought it up because it's a great program and everybody should participate. It's the way to safely integrate.
No, I think it's fantastic you brought it up, because now we get to say it's an urban myth, right?
It doesn't exist. And just one last, go ahead.
Maybe it should be a talking point that, this information is looked at. This is disseminated. This is useful information, and it will help your fellow drone operators.
And just one more comment, which I'm sure you're aware, but just in case you're not, when you talked about the collaboration and the different levels and the international entity, I'm sure you're aware it exists, but just in case you're not, recently the Flight Safety Foundation set up their autonomous and remotely piloted advisory committee. So I just wanted it looks like you are aware of that there's some connectivity to the work that they're doing as well. So thanks.
I am, and that's an excellent point. Thank you.
Yep, and the FAA is also participating on that, Trish. Excuse me, Trish. Sorry. Gary, back to you.
We have one more question from Joe DePete.
Hey, Joe.
Hey, Pete, as far as the Airline Pilots Association is concerned, this is music to my ears. Look, the committee itself, and for those that are watching that aren't part of the committee, I think it's pretty clear this committee came together very early on, developing a safety culture task group that everybody contributed to, and every recommendation was adopted, which was a fantastic start. But what you're talking about here is really the future of this technology. And I can't say enough about, the changes that took place through the commercial aviation safety team effort and how critical that data was. And I think it's really important that we get the word out in the education, because we literally shifted from a forensic approach towards accident investigation, where we had to, essentially wait for something to happen and then try to figure out what happened, to a risk predictive model, which is exactly what you're talking about here. We don't have to suffer the things that happened in the aviation. We have a chance to do this right by helping you develop a risk predictive model. And I wonder if there's a way to encourage, to help the FAA encourage them to figure out how we get you enough data to where it becomes meaningful and we get closer to the end game. Because, when you consider aviation, and since 2009, since the Colgan accident, we haven't really had a fatality due to that type, any kind of an error like that.
Right.
Minus the one situation with the fan blade, but that was a more of a maintenance issue. But it was, when you think that we're putting people in composite metal tubes in the lower stratosphere, and compare that record since that time, as many people have flown in airplanes, it is undoubtedly the safest form of transportation ever known to humankind. In the history of humanity, and it's an amazing achievement that was possible. And you're the grandfather of this now. So you have the entire support, I think, of all the committee to help figure out how to get you the data you need to, plow the way. So appreciate it.
Well, that's music to my ears. Thank you.
Absolutely. And just finally, Houston, I'm just so absolutely thrilled. I truly believe that I'm so happy, as a certificated admin, an airline pilot, I think you bring a really balanced view. You know what it's like out there. You're the right man at the right time with the right skill set, and really, really excited for you. And as a Marine brother, even more. Semper Fi.
Well, thanks, Joe.
Okay. Hey, Joe, thank you for those comments. And also, ALPA has been a very strong supporter of the UAST. Your staff that have participated have been truly supportive of all of this work. And I truly appreciate that. And Trish, to you as well at NACA, we appreciate your support. And I absolutely agree with you. This really needs to be a campaign across not just drone aviation, but traditional aviation, helping us get that word out. That this is very valuable, that the information we get back will make the system safer for everyone. Also, as we mature and add remote ID, I think that'll be another valuable component. We plan to merge all of that information and start creating that same sort of milieu that you have on the cast, where we can use that data to be predictive rather than wait for forensics. So greatly appreciate your support and are moving out on this.
Okay, Jay and Houston, I'm not seeing any additional hands raised or questions. So I think, Houston, I'll pass it back to you, and we can go into a 10-minute break.
Okay, great. Well, again, and Joe, thank you so much for the kind thoughts. You, Pete, what a fantastic overview. one of the recommendations we brought back to the FAA, as Joe pointed out, from a safety culture perspective, was collaboration opportunities and the things that the USAT are doing, particularly as it works with CAST. We would also offer up as one of our recommendations to perhaps look for opportunities to participate in FAA InfoShare, where you got traditional aviators from around the country. And there's so many folks who are looking for information and insights, and what you are doing and your leadership with the team will greatly help us accelerate that understanding and, quite frankly, solicit more ideas on how we can be successful. So I just want to thank you again, Pete, for taking time for this informative briefing. So at this time, we'll take a 10-minute break. DAC members, please remain logged into the meeting with your microphones on mute, and we'll resume in 10 minutes. I count that as 1:35. So thanks so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. The DAC meeting will resume in 2 minutes. Please return to your computers and ensure your microphones are on mute. Thank you.
All right, we're all set, Gary, to kick things back off.
I think we are. Welcome back to the second half of today's DAC meeting. A reminder that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. It will be available on the FAA's YouTube channel for later viewing. Also, a reminder for DAC members, after the next set of briefings, there will be a discussion and Q&A period. We ask that you first raise your hand using the Zoom command on your dashboard. An FAA moderator will be monitoring the dashboard and call on you to begin speaking. And lastly, our FAA team is monitoring the live stream. So for those of you on Zoom, if you have problems at any time during the meeting, please make a note in the comments in the Zoom dashboard and we will assist you. Okay, on to our next agenda item. Next agenda item is Task Group 10's recommendations for gender neutral language in the drone community. Trish Gilbert, Executive Vice President, National Air Traffic Controllers Association and Task Group Lead, will start the briefing and introduce her team. Trish, over to you.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate it. And before we get started, congratulations, Houston, in your new role. Excellent choice. Very happy for you, my friend, and look forward to all the great things you're going to do with the DAC leading us forward. At the 24th of February, the FAA Drones Advisory Committee established and tasked Task Group 10. Mark Baker and I, Mark Baker, President of Aircraft Owner and Pilots Association, and I were subsequently asked if we would co-chair this task group, and we both agreed to do that, absolutely. The task group members are from 17 organizations representing labor, airports, local government, service providers, traditional aviation, hardware and software, and drone manufacturers, and advanced air mobility. On March 10th, we conducted our first of many virtual meetings held by the full group, subgroups, and the subgroup leads. As the team tackled the research, writing, and complexity of the task, over and over again, all agreed that our recommendations and the subsequent work of the FAA and the drone community will be essential for modeling the leadership and behaviors that will build a more inclusive aviation community, And noted in the report, this is really bigger than just the drone industry. The entire aviation community, we believe, are watching. I can't thank the team enough for their hard work, their experience, expertise, their enthusiasm, their commitment, and the great talents they brought to the task. They never said no, and they worked tirelessly to bring you a good report and a good outcome. It's been a pleasure working with them, and it was really, really great to get to know them all just a little bit better. I do want to thank the FAA for presenting this tasking to us. And again, the report is in the ebook, and we hope that you will read that. Just to remind you, the taskings were to provide for the DAC's consideration recommendations for gender neutral language as an alternative to gender specific terms currently used in the drone industry and in the aviation community. And for the DAC to take the lead to facilitate the adoption of gender neutral language throughout the drone community and provide recommendations that organizations across the industry and community can implement. Next slide. I think I went 2 slides. There's a task in one more slide, thanks. And in order for the DAC to properly consider the task group's recommendation, a comprehensive report, as I mentioned before, is available in the ebook. But today we will present an overview of it, covering why gender neutral language is important, a proposed style guide, and 4 recommendations. Joining me to present today will be Michelle Anderson, who will present recommendation 1. Chris Anderson will present the style guide and recommendations 2 and 3. And then finally, my co-chair, Mark Baker, will end the presentation and provide recommendation 4 to you. Next slide. So while on the surface, the tasking may seem to be relatively simple, it in fact is complex. However, it is an integral piece to an overall commitment to safety, innovation, and to the many talented individuals, both in our communities today and the industry today, and those that will join us in the future. Removing any barrier, large or small, is a key element to ensuring that top talent with all kinds of backgrounds and experiences are attracted to our industry. Potentially harmful actions, terminology, and behaviors, while sometimes subtle, nevertheless undercut efforts to create a more inclusive, safe, and productive ecosystem. The DAC is uniquely positioned to do something different as the drone industry becomes a full partner in aviation. Adopting gender neutral language is a positive step toward that more inclusive and diverse ecosystem. An ecosystem where everyone is valued and heard, where they trust in their colleagues, their company, their organizations, educational institutions, their labor unions, and the aviation industry as a whole, and more specifically, the drone community. When they trust and have ownership in that system, it becomes safer because a robust safety culture is reliant on the participation of those expected to use it. Its success depends on whether employees are knowledgeable about it, whether they are well disposed towards using it, and whether they are committed to making it work. Finally, studies show, and the case has been made, that a more inclusive culture is an essential multiplier that maximizes and unleashes innovation and improved profitability. I hope that you will all agree, as an exemplary industry of transformational leaders, determined decision makers, that we all need to do our part in creating a respectful and welcoming culture full of diverse and highly engaged professionals that bring value and their talents to it. So with that, I'm really happy to present and to go into more detail into our presentation, Michelle Schwartz from Los Angeles World Airports.
Thank you so much, Trish. And thank you to the committee for the opportunity to address you today. Again, my name is Michelle Schwartz. I am the Chief Corporate Strategy and Affairs Officer at Los Angeles World Airports, which operates LAX and Van Nuys General Aviation Airports. I was privileged to lead the wonderful subgroup examining the question, why gender neutral language? And so, as Trish noted, the first reason why is that gender neutral language is important to foster an inclusive industry. As you can see in the line graph on the left, unfortunately, women remain greatly underrepresented in the aviation industry as a whole. Despite being a burgeoning industry, the known numbers for female drone pilots are not really any better. In 2019, there were 160,000 remote pilots, Of those, only 10,800 or 6.7% were women. This underrepresentation means that there is an untapped reservoir of talented individuals who can contribute to this industry. Attracting and retaining people, regardless of gender or gender identity, is crucial so that the drone industry does not face the same labor shortages that are currently affecting the broader aviation industry. Outreach to women and to other represented groups can have a big impact in attracting them to the aviation industry. The bar graph to the right is one example of where you can see this. AOPA's High School Flight Training Scholarship Program offers upwards of $1 million a year for high school students and teachers to pursue a primary pilot certificate. In just 1 year, as you can see in the graph, from 2020 to 2021, female scholarship recipients jumped from 27% of all recipients to 44%. And non-white recipients jumped from 13% to 21%. The difference between those 2 years was that in 2021, AOPA reached out to organizations serving underrepresented groups to get the word out on the scholarships. And so we can see that that outreach can really make a big difference. Gender neutral language is one way to do that outreach and to create an inclusive and diverse organization and culture. Studies have shown that gendered language leads to stereotyping and affects children's and adults' interests and views of occupational prospects. Moving away from this language can help overcome these stereotypes. Nations that have adopted gender neutral language have seen more favorable public opinion toward women and LGBT individuals in public life, as well as more clarity in their legislative and regulatory drafting. Next slide, please. The second reason why gender neutral language is important is that an inclusive workplace that uses inclusive language is an even safer workplace. Communication is a critical aspect of crew resource management. Gendered language can reinforce hierarchical thinking and diminish trust, thereby discouraging crew members from speaking up when safety issues arise. In contrast, effective communication engenders trust, which DAC Task Group 8, as you can see here, found was a foundational principle of strong safety cultures. As shown on the right here, the Miracle on the Hudson is an example that is attributed in no small part to effective communication among all those involved in landing the plane safely and rescuing those on board. Next slide, please. And workplace diversity leads to better business outcomes. Varied perspectives and skill sets deliver faster, more innovative solutions. They lead to a more satisfied workforce, attracting new talent, which in turn delivers competitive and profitable products. Diversity benefits, as shown here, can include solving problems more quickly, higher profits, and increased employee engagement, as a number of studies have shown. Next slide, please. All these reasons lead us to our first recommendation, which is that the Federal Aviation Administration should adopt gender neutral language in the drone industry. To ensure inclusion of all, regardless of gender identity, and to avoid burdensome language, we recommend using gender neutral language, such as person or they, rather than gender binary language, such as man or woman, or he or she. And with that, I'm happy to turn things over to Chris Anderson to address our next set of recommendations.
Thanks, Michelle. Could I have the next slide, please? So when we thought about the domain of language that we were going to address, we ended up breaking it up into some hierarchies. There's language that's statutory and regulatory in nature. There's language that is addressed to the lay public, like language in websites or communications. And then there's languages where there's an easy alternative to a gendered term, and those where it isn't. And so this taxonomy here in front of you describes the sort of examples of all four. Let's start on the top left. So in the case of repairman to technician, we have a pretty good, well understood term to swap in. I mean, I consider that's a regulatory language. It's very commonly used in the FAA, and there's a pretty easy substitute. It's not perfect, but it was an easy swap. Go down to the lower left, wife to spouse. It's not regulatory language, but does show up in some training materials and especially some historic materials. And that one seems like that's an easy fix as well, although because it's not regulatory, we might have to be going back into history, and might be a lower priority since we're primarily working on future language. Up in the top right, airmen and airman, we think that the word aviator is a good long-term solution there, and but it may require some statutory change, and so we think it's important. We think it's the right way to go, but we recognize there's some work to be done to incorporate that. And then when we get down to something like NOTAM, which is not explicitly gendered unless you actually know what it stands for, the airman there would presumably be replaced by aviator, but because it's so commonly used in statutory and regulatory language, we understand there's a challenge. And so one of the kind of more novel solutions we have there would be just to use it as a word, maybe not as an acronym, but just as a word for consistency and continuity in usage. So that's kind of there's examples of the four quadrants of difficulty. Let's move to the next slide, please. So these are examples of how we address that. The most important of us, obviously, the unmanned, and we surveyed a lot of other and legal entities, government entities, examples elsewhere, and we came around that uncrewed is the best alternative to that. It's certainly been adopted by other federal agencies, NOAA, NASA's history department, the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, et cetera. So we had a lot of precedent there. We felt it had the continuity of the U, which was useful for acronyms, and uncrewed serves the purpose. However, long term, we do recognize this is the Drone Advisory Committee, and that the word drone, it has a common parlance, and so we would encourage the FAA to consider drone long term as a acceptable alternative. We've already talked about replacing airmen with technician, airmen with aviators. Talked about NOTAM as a potential word, at least temporarily, rather than an acronym. And then obviously we recognize that some of these things are beyond the FAA's power to change unilaterally and may require changes in statutes. So these messages could go to Congress as a whole. Next slide, please. And then in terms of the pace and where to deploy, deploy where it's easiest first. So in something like social media or more informal language, we recommend that these recommendations be adopted immediately. In cases where there is a statutory regulatory process, we understand that that's going to require some FAA thinking, to do that, but that should begin, that process should begin as soon as possible. And that, ultimately, we hope that this is not going to be just drones. We hope that this will propagate, throughout the FAA, and that the drones, as always, will be a pathfinder for, good practices and novel approaches going forward across the agency. So with that, the more details are going to be in the report, where there's a full table of all of these, and you'll see that shortly. But I will turn back to Mark Baker from AOPA to come up with recommendation 4.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Michelle, as well. So, in this context of expanding the gender neutral language beyond the drone industry to all aviation industries is something that would make a lot of sense, and that's our recommendation for number 4. Also, encouraging the FAA, industry, pilots, and operators to embrace the required change. I know from AOPA's perspective, the largest purveyor of information to the general aviation, we will start on that journey as soon as possible. So it really comes down to thanking all the contributors to this effort to try and, we had a diverse group spanning manufacturers, associations, organizations, pilots and operators at all, as well as all genders and ages and ethnicities. Team grew on the strengths of other team members, demonstrating the benefits of the diverse team, where trust is paramount. And you can see the names and the groups that were involved in this tasking. So I think with that, Tricia, I think we want to open up to questions and see what commentary may be available for us to answer.
Again, just a reminder, if you have any questions or comments, just please raise your hand and I'll call on you. We have one from David Carvin.
Hey folks, I just want to thank you for the work you've done and what you're proposing here. I love the fact that it's broader than just what we're looking at in terms of drone. I think we need to take this on. I would encourage us to not worry too much about how hard it is and just drive forward and encourage our legislators to make the changes required if it's not just in the hands of the FAA. Being gender neutral and non-binary is going to have to start with us, and we're going to need to drive it. And, you know, I think your recommendations are solid, but let's not worry. It's going to sound tough, but let's not worry about what's hard or what's ensconced in, you know, legislation or regulations. We can write programs to go and find all these things in software, go and find everywhere the wrong thing appears and change it. And that's what it means to be a modern society. So thanks for everything you've done. I just encourage you to keep going and use us for help, because I know lots of people on the DAC have made these changes in their organizations, and we may fumble ourselves through what the right terminology is, but we'll get there at the end. The first thing is not to be satisfied with what's there today and not over-engineer the solution. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn over to Vic Moss.
Yeah, hi, thank you very much. Thanks for the work y'all are doing on this, but a potential problem really arises if we, and this is just really kind of, hey, we need to keep an eye out for this at a later time, but safety with the drones, drone operators is becoming an issue and will become more of an issue when remote ID is standardized. But the FAA is looking at adding UAS flight crews to the protection language in USC, what is 32 and then 46504, one of those possibly. And if we're going to start calling ourselves an uncrewed aircraft, which is fine, it's usable, we need to make sure that that language is transferred over into any protective language that is put forward in the for drone operators and drone crews in the future. So I can see a potential issue in that a lawyer down the road is going to use us as well. You know, you're uncrewed, so you're not part of a flight crew, so this doesn't apply to you. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has already ruled that part of the destruction of an aircraft does not include drones. I think a couple years ago they did that. So just really more of a, hey, we need to keep our eye on this kind of thing rather than any kind of editorial comment on the work so far that the team has done, because they've done some nice work.
Okay, thank you. Joe DePete.
Yeah, Trish, I just wanted to thank you, Mark, Michelle, and Chris for your work in this really important area. In 2019, I started a presidential committee for diversity and inclusion that I had head up by Camilla Torrieta, first officer from JetBlue, and I thank you for including her in this process as well. We've long at ALPA tried to, through our professional development group, encourage new people into our, all people into our profession. And I think to have the Drone Advisory Committee make this statement right now is very, very poignant right now at this time, very important to the future of aviation in general. I applaud the FAA as well. Cami and I have, Cami Torrieta and I have sat down with Brad Mims and Steve Dixon, communicated with Secretary Buttigieg on these issues. And if our aim is to make our profession or professions welcoming and accessible, this is the pathway, and I applaud everybody's efforts on these parts. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Joe. I'll turn over to Bob Brock now.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks, guys. This effort is really exceptional. I think that I don't think we have to worry about this committee being worried about taking on hard topics. This is a group that's building a reputation for charging the gate and getting what's done. And so I'm exceptionally proud of that and impressed by the crew. So this is a quick question for Mark or Michelle. as many, I would venture to say most of the organizations that are on this panel are out tackling these hard problems right now, especially within this aviation industry. What have you seen or observed so far or learned as you reach out to those disenfranchised or underrepresented communities? The number of applications that you receive for scholarships, and are you seeing increased applications? We're obviously giving more scholarships to a different sector of society today, and that's good and appropriate. What's been your best lesson to learn for getting more people to apply?
Thanks for the question, Bob. As we look at AOPA's STEM education program, which started 5 or 6 years ago, building out the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade curriculum that we provide free to high schools that are interested, and we train the trainer on how to teach the STEM-based education of all aspects around aviation. One of the concerns that we had early on in doing this through donors that have supported the foundation on this 100% is that there was some suggestion kids didn't care about aviation. Completely wrong. About 40% of the kids taking this class as an elective in high school are from underrepresented groups. These are tough classes in science, technology, engineering, and math. These kids have signed up for because they seek good careers and opportunities and pathways to be successful. So the interest is there. We think we're creating pathways to create opportunities to get in the aviation environment some way, somehow. And what I'm really encouraged about, we're in 500 high schools right now around the country, and we're working through some legislative activities to get some more government support, if you will, because this is a great education program. And it starts there. It starts out saying you can find a way to be involved in aviation, whether it's drones, aerospace, whatever part of it, engineering, doesn't matter. Great careers, never been better opportunity for young people. So they're interested. We need to help them find a way.
I would just like to add one thing onto that, if I can, Gary, real quick, Trish. I sit on the Women in Aviation Advisory Board, and soon we will be coming out with recommendations. And I will tell you some of the things that we found, maybe is obvious to some, but it's certainly shocking that the amount of recommendations that we're going to be put forward are going to outnumber probably 2 to 1, 3 to 1, every other barrier that might be in place for having a diverse workforce around the youth. It is about the counselors and teachers not aware of career paths. Curriculum doesn't exist in a lot of schools, whether it be elementary, junior high, high school, or universities. If they don't have a parent in the industry, or they don't live by an airport, or they didn't go into the military and get into aviation, they might not find their way to the industry. And then if you broaden that, I think, drones are a whole different thing where there's so many more opportunities where you can engage young boys and girls to be interested in this kind of stuff. And so I think if you make it available and you make them aware and you reach out, they will come.
Okay, thank you. We have Jazz Banga, your hand.
Hi, folks. As a father of identical 19-month-old triplet girls, I thank you, because you think this is really about access to opportunity, right? We send our kids to great schools so they have a great education. We keep good company for them so they have great company. And in the end, you want them to have access to opportunity. And to me, that's what this really signifies. So thank you for all your efforts.
Thank you. And Kathy Cahill, please.
Certainly, and I want to make sure that we don't miss all of the good things that the FAA is doing on STEM outreach. There are entire teams of the AVSED team that is really trying to get into the schools and other places. The Assure Center of Excellence is doing STEM outreach to underserved communities. And a lot of this really is going out and providing career paths, and not just as, aviators and program managers, but also as scientists and the potential there, and as filmmakers, and really expressing to people the diversity of careers that are open if you use this technology. So I think that there is a really good case for getting out there. And of course, it's the whole If they don't know that there are role models out there and they've never seen it, they won't know about it. So it is getting people into the field, into those communities. Hopefully people like them. And I will admit, I do a lot of outreach because women don't see women in aviation. And so it is a case where it takes my time, but it's very important that we show people that people like them can succeed in the field.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. David Carbon, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I was thinking of saying something insightful, but Jace trumped everything with, triplets at 19 months. So congratulations to him. For even getting here on time is a miracle. But hey, I think to state the blinding obvious, right? I mean, the words are just a start. I mean, what Kathy and Trish talked about is critical, right? I mean, the recommendations need to be 3x, just changing the words. Because if you look at the stats that were in the first couple of sheets that were shown, 21% of folks non-white. I mean, that compared to like huge white numbers and women. So, I think once we got our heads around the words as a community, I know this group does, but we really got to go and champion the actions that make the change. Because we don't want to be, the group that has the right words but the wrong actions, or the right words but nothing really changes. So I think that's really, really critical. So well done to FAA and folks like Trish and those organisations and Kathy for pushing it, because it's really all about what we do and what changes, and the change is represented in the numbers. And if we don't see the change in the numbers, we're not doing the right things. So we just got to keep going.
Okay, thank you, David. I'm not seeing any additional hands raised. Trish or Mark, do you have any final closing comments before turning it over to Houston?
I just want to thank Trish for her leadership on the whole team. They did a great job of convening through these times when you see people face to face, but they got the work done, and I'm proud of them. Thank you.
I agree. I just echo what Mark said. Thanks to the team. They did a lot of good work. I wish, we all had time to name them all, but they brought a really, everybody found their place and their talent, and they really engaged in that area, which I think brought us forward with a good product and a lot of good conversation. So with that, I guess we'll hand it back over to Houston.
All right. Well, thanks to Trish and Mark. We just so much appreciate your leadership. Michelle, Chris, wonderful presentations, and so many people, Trish, as you mentioned, to thank in this effort. And I would just also like to thank Jay and the FAA, for bringing this very important tasking, to the industry to start the conversation. We all know that diversity and inclusion initiatives are at the forefront, throughout the country. So for the FAA to offer us the opportunity to not only set the tone for, this particular industry, but we know that there's opportunities for this to translate over in traditional aviation as well. So what an exciting opportunity, and couldn't be more appreciative of the leadership for this team to bring this forward. So at this time, I will certainly entertain a motion to forward Task Group 10's gender neutral language recommendations to the FAA. Can I get a motion, please?
I will make that motion.
All right. Is there a second?
Second, Alpha.
Great. The motion has been seconded. Are there any objections to forwarding Task Group 10's gender neutral language recommendations to the FAA? Hearing no objections, the motion to forward Task Group 10's recommendations to the FAA is approved. I'd like to reintroduce the FAA's Deputy Administrator, Bradley Mims, to say a few words regarding these recommendations.
Thank you so much, Houston. And as a grandfather of an 8-year-old, and I'm pushing real hard to get into STEM education and hopefully into an aviation career, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the committee and acknowledge the hard work that Trish and Mark and the task group put into these recommendations. The FAA commits to reviewing these recommendations in detail. Implementing gender neutral language into the aviation community is an important step towards achieving diversity and inclusion in the workforce, as just was emphasized by all of you who commented this afternoon. Tricia, Mark, and the team went beyond what they had asked, what we had asked, and not only included recommendations for the drone community, but across all of aviation, and that's to be commended. The FAA responses to these recommendations will now determine which of these can be implemented quickly and which would require longer implementation periods due to regulatory impact. So again, thank you for your efforts. Thank the committee for your efforts. Before I go further, I want to go a little bit rogue if I could. I want to recognize in addition to the FAA family, who's a part of this meeting today, and that's Shanetta Griffin. Shanetta is the Assistant Administrator for Airports, and we welcome her. And in terms of dealing with our diversity profile, I want to make sure that everybody recognizes that we do and have brought Shanetta on. Many of you in the industry know her, especially those of you from the Midwest, but I am just very pleased to have her on board and as part of our team as we go forward. And again, thank you again to the entire Drone Advisory Committee, and I'll turn it back over to Jay for the next item on the agenda. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Brad. And so now the real work begins, right, Dak? Now we figure out how to implement this. So with that, can you go to the next slide, please? Our next agenda item are the new taskings to the DAC. Next, please. The first new tasking that we would like to provide to the DAC is to review the acceptable levels of risk for unmanned aircraft operations paper. So internal to the FAA, we've been really considering, how should we view safety risks for drones versus uncrewed aircraft. And we really believe we need feedback from the larger community. So the paper we're presenting to the DAC today is one that is our current thinking of how we should view proposals for waivers, exemptions, safety risk management, how we should view new standards and regulations. Drone aircraft or uncrewed aircraft really are very different from crewed aircraft or aircraft where people are on board as a pilot or as a passenger. So how should we review these decisions relating to approving waivers and determining new regulations? And what level of safety, how should we really craft the safety continuum question? So this is our current thinking. We're providing it to you. The tasking is, would you please provide comments and validate, verify, help us understand where you as the larger community, both in the drone side and on the traditional aviation side, as we integrate these aircraft, are we taking the right views and what's your feedback? So we would really like your responses due back to the Secretariat in 60 days. Like many of the taskings we provided to the DAC, I know you will dig into this with great energy and great commitment. And should you need more time, I understand that this is a very important topic for all of us. So please feel free to let us know if you need additional time. And the second tasking, it's really, oh, I'm sorry.
So Jay, thank you. At this time, I'd like to entertain a motion to accept the FAA tasking acceptable level of risk for UAS operations paper review. For this tasking, DAC members will have 60 days, as Jay mentioned, to respond back to the DAC secretary as outlined in the tasking statement. So can I get a motion to approve, please?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Thank you. The motion has been seconded. Are there any objections to objecting the FAA tasking acceptable level risk for UAS operations paper review?
I have Brian Wynn, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, not an objection, Houston, just a clarification. So Jay, is this, you want responses collectively as a group, or are we organizing that, or are we just?
From the DAC as a whole.
Okay, so I'm certainly supportive of that. I'm just wondering from an organizational standpoint if we're going to talk about how to do that, or are we?
Yeah, so
go ahead.
So Brian, I'll be reaching out. I'll get a couple folks to kind of take the leadership role as we have with other taskings, and that way collectively we can kind of provide input back.
Copy. Thanks.
All right.
All right. Hearing no objections, the motion to accept the FA tasking acceptable level of risk for U.S. operations paper review is approved. Jay?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Houston. Sorry, I skipped ahead on the slide. So the second tasking is integration of UAS operations into K through 12 curriculums or curricula. And this, listening to the conversation about the gender neutral language and involving a much broader community into aviation, we think this is very important. So we're looking at introducing this into K to 12 curricula and developing the next generation of innovative leaders and operators, encouraging investments. So the actual tasking is to have the DAC develop recommendations on how to integrate UAS operations into K through 12 curricula.
Excellent. Thank you, Jay. So for this second tasking, I will entertain a motion to accept the FA's tasking integrating UAS operations into K through 12 curriculum and assign it to the Operations and Technology Subcommittee as outlined in the tasking statement presented. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
And can I get a second, please?
Second.
Okay, the motion has been seconded. Are any objections to accepting the FA taskings integrating UAS operations into K through 12 curriculums?
Mark Baker, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to introduce the topic. In our 9 through 12 curriculum that we have today, we do offer the 107 drone pilot certification, ground school, if you will, class in that curriculum already. And we do introduce all the drone subjects through the 9 through 12 curriculum. So a lot of that is based on the industry and it's ready to go. So we really need his help in rolling that out, I think. But it stands by to be supportive.
Awesome. Well, we'll certainly look forward to leveraging that existing expertise, Mark, as we go down this new tasking. So thank you for sharing those insights for sure. Okay, hearing no objections, the motion to accept the FA tasking integrating UAS operations into K through 12 curriculums is approved. We have one final agenda item, that is an opportunity for DAC members to present any new business items or to recommend any future meeting agenda topics. Are there any DAC members at this time who wish to present any new business items?
Yes, we have Kenji. You have your hand raised?
Yes, I do. Chair Mills, congrats on the position and really excited to have you in a leadership position. So congrats on that. One thing that I did want to bring up is with the Lance outage in the last few days that resulted in real economic damages to drone operators, I'd be interested in having the DAC explore recommendations for an update to the FAA Lance USS Performance Rules 5.0, Section 3.8, dealing with contingency operations, perhaps creating Lance zero procedures like ATC zero. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Okay, thank you, Kenji. We will take that for consideration. My colleague, Tim Morell from the Air Traffic Organization, could you join us and maybe answer some questions? Or
certainly. Thanks, Kenji. Thanks,
Tim.
Jay. For the Air Traffic Organization that operates and maintains the Lance, the platform, we experienced an outage from 11 a.m. Sunday morning till approximately 7 p.m. Tuesday evening. We know it was impactful. As soon as we recognized that a regularly scheduled maintenance update had a confliction basically between the geospatial server and the FAA's network configuration. We notified all the UAS service providers that that option or the option or access to file for UAS operations was still available through the drone zone. We also put out that message through our network. So very basic form of a backup, but we know that doesn't rise to a level of resiliency or contingency that you may be looking for. So right now the team's focused on pulling apart what occurred, making sure that it won't happen again, at least not in that format. And then additional layers of contingencies or resiliencies certainly can be explored as part of our normal operation and review of our operations and configuration. So team's working on it now. Jay, I'll defer to you on how it would be viewed from the DAC, but we're always open to suggestions.
Yeah, thank you, Tim and Kenji. We will consider whether there's DAC tasking or just working with our colleagues in air traffic and moving forward. I
appreciate it. And a quick follow up on that, Tim. Do you know whether we'll get a report out on that, on sort of lessons learned and what happened post?
Sure, absolutely. We can provide that information in the next DAC.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we'll take that as an action to provide a briefing in the next DAC. How's that?
Thanks, Jay. Appreciate it.
You bet. Mr. Moss, I see your hand raised.
Yes, thank you very much, Jay. I broached this subject just a bit ago, but I think it's something that as DAC members, we really need to think about and possibly contribute to. And that is the safety of the drone operators, whether it's a corporate operator, individual operators like myself. Some of you do know that I'm already right now involved in a situation where a local pilot was attacked 2 weeks ago. Drone and controller were destroyed, phone was damaged, and he was hurt. With remote ID coming out and with the ability for people to find us fairly easily, even, obviously we're going to be VLOS anyway, but this needs to be addressed at the federal level, because as it is right now, local police won't do anything. In the particular instance here in Colorado, the guy was charged with criminal mischief, and that was the end of it for now. So I don't know if this is a DAS committee task group or not in the future, but it's something I think as a committee that needs to be addressed pretty quickly, pretty comprehensively, and it'll go a long way to help alleviate some of the fears that are going to be coming online here in the next 12, 15 months.
Vic, may I commit to meeting with you offline and figuring out how to best proceed on this kind of topic, because clearly some of these issues will far exceed the FAA's regulatory authority and our safety mission. So maybe we can meet offline and start figuring out how to untangle this and address this from a whole USG kind of perspective.
I would love that very much. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Shu.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. I just want to say we are absolutely honored to be selected by FAA as a trust administrator. My name is Paul Shu. I'm the chairman for Shu Educational Foundation. We're a 501c organizations. We promote the STEM education for the UAS training to K-12 students by workshops, drone camps, and all that. So on the average, we have close to 100 kids flying drone in our facility. So, and in the last few years, we also train quite a few firefighters and police officers and the military drone operators per the Part 107. Just last 2 years, we also work very closely with the Texas A&M Lone Star UAS Center of Excellence and the partnership. So together we established BVLOS under the FAA COA corridor connecting the Bob Sachs Airport, which is located in Florida in Crestview, to our own STEM range to support the development and testing for the uncrewed traffic management and advanced air mobility research. So we're just looking forward sincerely to work with FAA in the future to add any safe integration to the U.S. operation. So thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Any other comments before we move forward? But definitely appreciate the dialogue and thought leadership. Very helpful. Okay, if there are no other items to discuss, I'd like to turn it over to our designated federal officer, Jay Merkel, for his closing remarks.
Thank you, Houston. And every DAC meeting, I say I feel like it's our best and that we're improving. And this is no exception. Houston, we've been eagerly awaiting having you as our new chairman. It's been fantastic to work with you in the background prior to this chairmanship, and I just can't wait to see all that you bring to the larger community in this role. And I truly, truly do appreciate the fact that you took on this responsibility, because I know I get texts from you that say, oh, sorry, I just landed in Alaska. I didn't get this until now, right? So I appreciate that very, very much. I want to thank all the DAC members and all the people who support the DAC for all the hard work that went into this. The remote ID, wow. We asked you to dig deep and you really did. The gender neutral language. I believe that you probably set the template for aviation. From this small little corner of the world, you probably set the template for aviation. So now it's our job to figure out how to execute. I also want to take time to thank all of those who did all the behind the scenes work on the FAA side, on the DAC side, the graphics, the presentations, the audio visual. It's a lot of work to put on a virtual meeting and to make it available to all of you as the public. And I thank everyone who made that happen. I encourage everyone that's interested in being a part of the DAC process to get involved, whether it's applying to be a DAC member or participating on the subcommittee or task groups or any other of the FAA programs or initiatives. This is really your opportunity to be a part of crafting the future and being a part of the solution. I'm so encouraged by the changes we've made in broadening the community and including more and more voices that maybe haven't been included before. And I think we're really seeing that we're reaping the benefits for it. I also would like you to be on the lookout for detailed information on Beyond Visual Line of Sight, Episode 4, A New Hope. And that's our fourth and final. I know it's a terrible dad joke, Vic. You know, we can't help ourselves. Seriously, we really do see this as really this huge inflection point where we're now moving to normalize beyond visual line of sight operations, and the next version of the next episode of the symposium will follow that. And that will cover BV loss operations, operational advancements, and international. And we're also looking forward to the next DAC meeting in the October timeframe. Please watch the Federal Register for the official announcement. We will decide within the next few weeks whether it will be in person or virtual. I'm kind of hoping we all get to see each other face to face. And so with that, Houston, sir, I turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Jay. And thank you to everyone who participated in making today's DAC meeting a great success. And I think to Jay's point, the fact that we as different stakeholders from different parts of the industry had the opportunity to participate and bring, just this type of thought leadership forward to the FAA for consideration as they map out the future of this industry. What a tremendous honor. And I'm just so proud and humbled for this opportunity to make the transition to the DAC chair. And I promise you, I'll give you my all to help us collaborate together, work through tough issues, and bring the FAA the absolute best recommendations. So thank you all. We will begin the work on the new taskings and look forward to hearing from the FAA. from their responses to the 2 recommendations that were presented today. I also want to make a pitch and encourage all interested parties to seek out opportunities to serve on the various committees. As you can see, we've got tremendous leadership, not only on the DAC, but the subcommittees and those that come from the organization. So we certainly appreciate that. So with that, do I have a motion to adjourn today's DAC meeting?
So moved.
I make a motion.
Thank you. And can I get a second?
Second.
Second.
All right, the motion to adjourn has been seconded. Are there any objections to adjourning today's DAC meeting? I'll pause just a second just to say, hearing no objections, the motion to adjourn today's meeting is approved. And I want you to know that I'm giving you back 2 minutes of your time. So thank you so much for your participation. Be safe, stay healthy, and God bless.